When I first met Bunjie back in 2010 and bought a rangefinder shortly thereafter, I remember wondering why someone didn't combine the two pieces of equipment, a scope and a rangefinder, into a single device. I am happy to see that now, a dozen years later, that technology exists.
They've finally done it. Can you believe that? My vision, actually, from 2010 has come true. We finally have a scope that combines a perfect scope with a rangefinder. So you don't have to have two different pieces of equipment. You don't have to do this one and then do this one. You can just do this one, right? It's perfect. I know you're probably sick of me talking about my new book, The Death by Bunjie Crossbow Method. You're probably sick of me talking about the Burris Oracle X rangefinding crossbow scope also, but bear with me. You're going to hear the good and bad and the ugly on this video. I want to start by saying I'm not sponsored by anybody here on Death by Bunjie. I had to buy this scope and the other one that's hanging on the OB back there. I bought one for that crossbow too, so I bought two of these scopes because I like them so much. Not sponsored by anybody, but if I were sponsored by somebody, Burris, for the purposes of this scope, is one of the companies that I would like to be sponsored by. I mean, this makes sense to me, right? I'm only sponsored by Death by Bunjie, by Crossbow Hunting, and Fred here is here not only to model his fluorescent orange, part of his ridiculous costume, because it's the Pennsylvania rifle season now, what I like to call the second crossbow season. But he's here also to model some of the Death by Bunjie t-shirts, which are now going on sale on deathbybunjie.com. Really, really low prices for any remaining inventory. That sale is only going to last until Christmas. And at the end of the year, it goes away. And the t-shirts that are available on there, the products that are available on there will not be back. Next year we'll have new products. The two CDs that you hear all the music from here on Death by Bunjie, my two CDs from my band Yankee Militia. I have a few left. If you want to buy up the remaining inventory on those, go to deathbybunjie.com also. You'll get a chance to get a physical CD shipped from me to you, and then you can listen to the music of Death by Bunjie all the time if you want to. Let's talk about the Burris Oracle X, shall we? This is the perfect crossbow scope because it helps you make accurate shots. It helps you make long shots accurately, and it helps you make short shots accurately. It does it all. It combines a rangefinder with a scope. When I first put this on here, I was excited about it. I don't usually try things that are brand new to the market. This is only the second year they've been making these scopes from Burris, and so I'm kind of using a new product here. So it's a little bit of a risk. I don't usually do that. I like tried, true, and tested, right? I like something that's been on the market for a couple of years. Other people have used it. They've tweaked it a little bit, fixed it. But I'm pretty happy that I rolled the dice on this, so much so that I bought a second one. When I first installed it, sure enough, the height is a problem. It sits up in the air pretty good. The Garmin version of this, the similar scope, also sits up higher. The reason for that, I think, is you got to have room for the rangefinder below the scope must be. They put that together, but nonetheless, these all seem to sit a little bit higher. Because of that, I had to invest in a cheek piece to get the proper cheek weld, to get my cheek up high enough. And anytime you change one thing on a crossbow, you change other things on a crossbow. Am I right, Fred? If you agree with me, don't say anything. Yep, he agrees. I got in touch with Got a Grip, another company that I actually like now that I've dealt with them. Putting that cheek piece on there, that worked perfectly for this crossbow. It has stayed intact, in and out of the woods, in and out of the case, all season long. So the Got a Grip was a good combination for this. Worked good on this stock. May not work on everything, I don't know. I won't say that I'm as familiar with this scope yet as I was with my old beloved Twilight DLX from Excalibur. That scope had its limitations, but it was the right height for both this crossbow and the OB. This one I'm getting used to. Over time, it will replace that familiarity. And that's the reason I put it on both crossbows. I don't want to be going back and forth between two different scopes. There's no room for a Tactacam. It's so big, the mount doesn't work here, and I can't put the Tactacam on here. There are other Tactacam methods you could use. I've gone back to my camera clamp idea, and I'm just going to mount the Tactacams off the crossbow. and use them with a remote. That's what I've been doing anyway. Setting this thing up really wasn't that bad, but I will say one of the cons with this thing, one of the things I don't like, is adjusting the 20-yard reticle, the physical reticle, the center line, the 0 line in the scope. That's a pain in the butt. There's this tiny little Allen wrench, little hole, little screw that you got to take out in 2 places. You got to loosen it up, make the physical adjustment, and then you got to tighten it back up before you take a shot. And then if it needs more adjustment, you got to do that all over again. It takes a while. The good news is once the 20-yard line is set, the rest of it kind of falls in place. You get to true it digitally at these different distances. I did another video on that, but it's really easy to do. And it's fun to do, actually. Chase the dot around the target a little bit. It's actually pretty fun. And whatever software they're using is pretty accurate because once you've set the 20-yard line and trued it at like 30, 32 yards, something like that, 40, 50, 60, 70, they all fall in place pretty much. They need a little bit of adjustment, but not much. Big thing you read about online with these, people complaining about batteries with these, 2 reasons. One is the installation. That is a little bit hard to get your fingers in there and actually do the battery installation, especially with my big hands, but loosening that up, I'm able to get it. The good thing is, at least for me, battery life has not been all that bad. Now, I've had this one on here since midsummer on this crossbow, and I've shot it hundreds and hundreds of times on the original battery without the battery going dead. I mean, I shot more this summer than ever before. I was having timing issues, remember that this summer? But I got all that fixed, and I had to take a lot of shots in order to get my head around what was going on. I will tell you, when the battery goes, it goes. It doesn't kind of go. You go from a full battery on the screen to nothing, and then all of a sudden it just barely fires up, and then it stops firing up. So you just carry a spare battery with you, not a big deal. Able to replace the battery, it's on its second battery. Bunjie there, still on the first battery. So the people that are having problems with the battery, this is a first generation scope. It's entirely possible that there's some variety, if you know what I'm saying, between one version of it and the next. In other words, it's, maybe mine, they've tweaked it a little bit, even though it's still the first version of the scope. I don't know. When you're out in the field, the deer start coming in. You got to push the button on top of the scope to turn the scope on. It doesn't turn on automatically with the push of the Bluetooth remote button. You push this button, it turns the scope on. The scope just stays on for 30 minutes. Then it times out and it shuts off. Unless you've pushed the Bluetooth remote button. I've got that attached up front here, right where I want it. It's perfect. Or unless you've adjusted something here, touch these buttons. If you don't touch these buttons, you don't touch that, it shuts off automatically to save battery after 30 minutes, and you'll have to turn it back on. Fred and I agree on this, that this isn't a big deal. When I'm sitting in the field with this, hunting, I'm playing around with it the whole time anyway. Like, how far away is that tree? Let's play with the scope. Push the button, you're doing it. So it really never shuts off. And the battery seems to be just fine. If the battery goes dead, it's got a built-in 20-yard reticle, not a problem. For you mobile guys, just like Bunjie the Third and I here trying to be, get out there on public ground. We're public ground hunters now. But we were playing around with that. The extra weight might be a thing for you. It weighs about 2 ounces more than the Excalibur Twilight DLX. I think it's true. It's probably safe to say that really good glass is heavy, right? The better scope you have, the more low light performance you have, the heavier scope's going to be. Really, overall, this is lighter than carrying, or about the same weight as carrying a scope and a rangefinder. So overall, it's not much different. It does make the crossbow a little bit heavier, but it's worth it in my opinion. Now, just like good glass is kind of heavy, it's also kind of expensive. The better scopes are going to cost more. This costs a lot more. This really costs about the same as a high-end crossbow scope plus a high-end rangefinder, neither of which have I ever bought. But when you combine the two in this, that's kind of the price. It's $900, or you can get them in the 600s on sale here and there. It's a pricey piece of equipment. I can see myself using this for years, and I thought it was just, once I got the first one, I realized it's kind of worth the money to me. I don't buy stuff like this, right? So take my word for it. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I had to pay for both of them like everybody else. I really don't think I'm going to shoot a crossbow that doesn't have this, or a newer version of this, on it. But it's pricey. Come on, go buy a copy of my book to help me pay for that thing. We should talk about low light, shouldn't we? What about low light performance? I gotta tell you, I'm satisfied with it. I haven't used every scope on the market, but I
used that Twilight DLX, one of Excalibur's best low light performers, and this is as good or better to my eye. I had the luxury of using this scope over the ridge staging food plot, looking at a couple of doe fawns in there feeding and messing around with my mock scrape. I can tell you that this scope would have assisted me perfectly in taking a shot well past the time where my naked eye gave out and well past where my camera stopped filming. It will get you to the end of legal light.
Now, I've talked about how the scope performs, but how does the rangefinder perform, right? That's a legit question. And I got that question from a lot of people. To make sure that it was functional, I actually took that and my little trusty Bushnell rangefinder out on the backyard there in a foggy morning. And I can tell you that they seem to be basically the same quality of rangefinder, okay? So in other words, yeah, they struggle with fog, but the rangefinder struggled with fog the same as this did. It wasn't any better or any worse, so that's good. Here's the advantage, though, of this guy. When it won't range, it gives me my 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, whatever. It fills up the entire screen in here, the entire lens, with dots for those exact yardages. So even if I can't use the rangefinder, if I already know the distance, I can still get digital reticles, dots, showing me precisely where each of those yardages are. So if you're in a familiar hunting location, and I know it's 60 yards, but I can't quite use the rangefinder, I still get a dot for 60 yards. And I can still use it just like I would a traditional scope. That's pretty cool. I can tell you another thing. The rangefinder in this worked perfectly in the snow. I had pretty heavy, dense, wet snow falling. Got about 3 inches in an hour of big, thick, wet, fluffy stuff that melted overnight. But the rangefinder in here worked perfectly despite all of that snow. Now, here's a big one for guys like me with our aging eyes, right? I still don't wear glasses. I am putting it off. I'm fighting it tooth and nail, buying bigger TVs every year, it seems like, in order to comfortably be able to read the television. Who needs glasses, right? This has an independent zoom, a zoom that's independent of the sighting in. Remember, on our scopes, if you adjust that speed ring on most of those crossbow scopes, it's going to zoom in and out. Yeah, it makes it easier to see or farther away, whatever, but it also affects your sighting in. You've changed the sighting in, so it's no longer accurate, right? This sights in digitally, and zooming in and out, that has nothing to do with it. I can zoom in, get a better look at that deer. I can zoom out for the closer deer, and that doesn't affect the accuracy. It's perfect. Another thing I read about on social media, on the forums and on Facebook, and I get this, is that the built-in level on this scope isn't really good. You got to tilt the crossbow quite a bit in order to get that level to say, hey, wait a minute, you're not level. Here's what I found though, and I think I'm right on this, and I'm anxious to hear back from other people as they use this scope. At 20 yards, you can tilt that crossbow quite a bit, and it really doesn't tell you much about the level. At 70 yards, or at 100 yards, it becomes a lot more sensitive. And that's pretty cool. Really, at 20 yards, that's the center reticle, right? It doesn't matter if you're canting. It doesn't matter if you're tilting the crossbow. What difference does it make? You're still shooting right in the middle. It makes some difference because, you don't want to shoot the crossbow sideways. At 70 yards, a little bit of canting can make a lot more difference. The level that's built into this becomes a lot more sensitive, to my eyes at least, at longer distances, and that's when you need it. So it's actually the computer telling you, hey, wait a minute. It'll be a lot more likely to tell you that you're canting the crossbow at distance because it makes more of a difference. That's pretty cool too. The big thing about this scope is that you get precise yardages. Your aim point, your point of aim, that little red dot is going to be exact every time you pull the trigger, right? You pull up on a deer, you push the little button and make sure you get the little dot. You can double check by looking. It'll tell you the yardage at the top of the reticle, and then you just use the red dot, put that on your point of aim, and pull the trigger. You should be hitting exactly where that red dot is if you've done everything properly. It gives you really, really good confidence, almost too much confidence, really, when you pull the trigger. Because now I know that the arrow is going to go right where I'm aiming. Not only has that been confirmed in the backyard, but on 2 shots on deer with this crossbow and this scope, that arrow, looking back at the footage, goes exactly where I was aiming both times, at 42 yards and 52 yards. And again, these aren't exact yardages. This isn't 50 yards, 60 yards. It's not even 55 yards. 52 is one of those odd numbers. 42 is one of those odd numbers. When you've got a scope that can give you pinpoint accuracy at those odd distances, that's pretty cool. I'm saying that's pretty cool an awful lot in this video, aren't I, Fred? But it is pretty cool, Fred. Check this out. You're not looking. Right here. Whatever. There's a couple things that I'll tell you about that. The reason I say that that's so cool is because I wrote that down. At 400 feet per second or so with this crossbow, there's a 6-inch difference between 45 yards and 50 yards. Did you know that? If I aimed as though that deer was at 45 yards, but really that deer was at 50 yards, there's going to be a 6-inch difference in my shot. You can go to deathbybungie.com, use the calculators there. Thank you, old grumpy hunter, for all of the work that you did on those. We put together a whole bunch of calculators. You can access them through there or off of his website also. Even at 25 to 30 yards, the difference, like if I thought the deer was at 30, but I aimed as though it was at 25, that's a 3.5-inch difference, even with this faster, more modern crossbow. You get into slow stuff, if you're shooting heavy arrows that shoot slow, you're going to see even more difference, right? I wrote down some of those. That crossbow, shooting around 260 feet per second with 563 grain zombie slayers, there's a 7-inch difference between 25 yards and 30 yards. 7 inches. Not that you're going to shoot 45 yards or 50 yards, but the difference between 45 and 50, if you're off by just those 5 yards and guessing the yardage, that's a 13-inch difference with that older, slower crossbow. Whoa, that old, slow crossbow. That's a 13-inch difference. That's disaster in the woods. We don't want that in the crossbow woods. We want exact accuracy, precise accuracy. And that's what this scope gives us. There's no 6-inch difference, 3-inch difference, 13-inch difference. There's 0 difference. It removes that room for inaccuracy and it replaces it with just Rich Wilson's skill level, right? I get to take all the credit for a good shot and I take all the blame for a bad shot. That's crossbow hunting perfection, really. And that, friends of Bunjie, accuracy is number 1 with crossbows. Overall, I gotta tell you, I love this scope. I really do. I know you know that already. But I love this scope, both for this crossbow, a more modern crossbow, and on the old slow Bunjie. I love this scope for both of them because it gives me precise, accurate yardage, and because of the ease of use, it's so easy to use, but also because it has really, really built my confidence to make accurate shots in the field. And that's awesome. Mark my words. In 10 years, everybody out there hunting with a crossbow is going to be hunting with a scope like this. These things are going to come down in price. They're going to become more popular. They'll work out the little kinks. They're only going to get better and cheaper. Decades ago, people were shooting crossbows with iron sights. And there's still a few people doing that. I don't know why, but there's still a few people doing that. And then they had red dots, right? Red dot scopes. And then you had the scope that came on the original Bunjie. No numbers on it, nothing like that. Only went out to 50 yards. It was pretty accurate, but it wasn't, exactly. If you changed the broadhead, all of a sudden it wasn't accurate anymore, and there's no way to adjust it. Then they came out with, what'd they come out with? Speed rings. That was pretty cool. I remember when I upgraded that crossbow, this is how long I've been doing this stuff. I actually started with a crossbow that didn't have a speed ring, and I upgraded to a scope, and then another scope, an even better scope, but with speed rings, so I could adjust the arrow weight and still be accurate. 5 or 10 years from now, that becomes your standard. Fred and I want to say thank you for watching this video. Check out deathbybungie.com for some of the Christmas sales that are going on there. And until next time, all hail Bunjie and Bunjie 3.0.